Hello and welcome to The Current Thing with me, Nick Dixon. This is the second since we changed this to a topical show, although strictly speaking, sometimes they were topical anyway. It's a semantic shift largely, but it's now a current affairs show. What a great name for a current affairs show, The Current Thing. It's got multiple meanings, guys. It's so good. Sorry to everyone who is sad about the end of the Weekly Skeptic. We announced that today as we record, which is Wednesday. We just couldn't go on, as Todd Rundgren would say, what does he say? We can't play this game anymore. But can we still be friends? That's kind of how we ended it. Friendly, but we just couldn't go on anymore. So sorry to anyone that loved the Weekly Skeptic. But now you have the current thing, which is going to be the closest alternative, really. It's going to be topical banter every week with many great guests. And if you are coming across from the Weekly Skeptic, you can subscribe to nickdixon.net. And I am doing various offers on that, but you probably know about those from listening to the Weekly Skeptic. NickDixon.net, where you have all my topical content. You have my guest episodes, where you get the full versions of all my guest episodes. You get my solo reaction podcasts. You get my articles, which are very underrated, if I do say so myself. Everything is on nickdixon.net, and it's just £5 a month. But we now are doing the current thing every week as a free podcast. And because I don't want to keep him waiting any longer with this ridiculously long intro, let's introduce today's guest, who is the star of GB News, comedian, entrepreneur, thinker. It is, of course, the People's Gammon, Mr. Paul Cox. How you doing, Paul?
I'm great, thanks. I think you left out lover.
Yes.
But yeah, I am one of those as well. Great to be here, Nick. Great to be here. Always good to speak to you. Especially the intro was fine, mate. Nothing wrong with that intro whatsoever. You're like a one-man media outlet. You're the UK's answer to Fox News.
Yes. Thank you very much. I mean, it was a bit long. I forgot the name of that Todd Rundgren song, but basically, if people like the Week Accepted. Me and Toby did a quite amicable episode, and we might still do live shows in the future, maybe if people are interested. But we're just not doing the podcast. But yeah, there's plenty of stuff because we're doing this every week. And I think this is the next best thing. Some
Awesome.
people
That
may
was
even like
very
it better.
very Ronnie Barker of you. You knew it was, you knew it was good. You leave it good, don't you? You just that's it.
Yeah, leave them wanting more, and hopefully they'll like this. And yeah, this is going to be topical with different guests every week. And Paul is one of our favorite guests. He's been before and he's back again. Just trying to think if I've covered everything. I think I have. I think that's probably enough. I still don't know what to call the guest episodes. That's the only thing that's bothering me. I thought about calling it the current guest, but is that weird to sit there with like David Starkey and say, "Welcome to the current guest"? Yeah, it sounds a bit. I just don't know if I can pull that off, even though it makes sense for the brand. I don't know. I'm still working on that.
It's a bit
But
like the current Mrs. Dixon type attitude, type vibe, though, isn't it?
Oh yeah, good point. Yeah, my
Very
current
Terry
wife.
Wogan.
Yeah, someone said it to me the other day. They said my current wife. I thought, problems. Yeah, okay. Well, we'll think about that. But that's enough indulgence about the name and so on. We'll crack on now with the hard topicality. We thought we'd start with Starmer. Good old Keir Starmer. I thought we'd give you a bit of the red meat here. And his approval rating is completely tanked. But weirdly, Blair told him to just ignore it and just plow on, which may work for Blair. I'm not totally sure it will work for old Starmer. But that was his advice. Just ignore it. You can't please all the people. So let's see if that works. And then today, did you see this moment, Paul, where he was in the Prime Minister's questions and he kept saying the Prime Minister, meaning Rishi Sunak, and he did it 3 times. I thought he did it once, 3 times. And he said the Prime Minister, then everyone starts laughing. And he did that thing that only Starmer's only move, which is to go, this is a serious issue. This is very, very serious. We know it's serious here. We're not the ones getting the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition confused. We're not the ones that don't know that we're the Prime Minister. Like we're taking it more seriously than you, it seems like. We kept calling. I mean, how embarrassing. What I'd have done is got out of it by saying something like, well, it was a snap election, you know what I mean? Or I think we've all been psychologically damaged by 14 years of Tory rule or something like that, right? Make it funny. But he just went, this is a very serious issue. Imagine like any banter with Starmer. Imagine you're at a football match. Like, well,
There is no banter.
Right. 2 World Wars and 1 World Cup. You say that, but it's chance of one thing, but it's far right thuggery. What was your take?
Well, I think it's indicative of two things actually. One is the point you just made, which is Starmer can only operate within a fine channel. It's like a radio station. You can only receive him on on Starmer FM, and you'll only get one thing from him. That is all he can achieve. The other thing is, it is very indicative of the fact that he and his cabinet are still governing as if they're in opposition. There's no leadership about anything that Keir Starmer's government does. I tweeted today to say that they're all policies of scorn from this Labour Party. They all have a target. They all set out to punish a group or community of people that they have been wanting to get at for some considerable amount of time. And now that they're in power, they think that's what they can do with it. Look at everything they do. It's always a target. Far right thuggery. Okay, they don't mean for far right thuggery, they mean working class people, the sort of people that they really do despise. And old people didn't vote for us. Didn't vote for us. There's no skin in the game for old people where Labour are concerned. So what they're going to do is attack them with this winter fuel allowance. Now, what they've forgot to do in any of this is politics. First things first, the most vocal group in politics are the elderly. They've got more time. They understand politics more than young people do, and they have sort of wealth of experience behind them. And what else are they going to do? You take away their winter allowance for those that. Let's not get this wrong. Okay, we all understand that means testing. I say we all understand. My understanding is that means testing for the winter fuel allowance is not necessarily a bad thing. When you're looking around at things where you can save money, you definitely can save it there. But 1.4 billion pounds that's going to save. When you compare that to sort of 10 billion pounds on net zero per year, it's a waste. He did talk about that there was going to be a run on the Bank of England if he didn't do it. Either he or one of his cabinet members do it, like it was Northern Rock again. This wasn't going to happen. Well, 1.4 million, 1.4 billion is a drop in the ocean compared to some of the other vanity projects they got. So everything they say to justify and validate what they're doing doesn't stack up. And I just feel like it's politics of envy. It's communism light. It's what you get when you get a huge majority that was only voted in for by about 30% of the electorate, and when the rest of us were kind of disenfranchised by politics so much that we had no idea who to vote for. And let's just take reform, for instance. There's been a sort of resurgence in that populist right politics, and I'm pleased to see it. But at this stage of the political cycle, it doesn't offer us any hope because it will offer us hope, sorry, but it doesn't offer us any solution because these people aren't in power. So what we've ended up with is Labour, and we didn't. I thought it was going to be bad, but I didn't think it was going to be this bad. And I think there are a lot of people sat there now going, "Oh, mate, this is much worse than I thought it would be." Yvette Cooper scares the living daylights out of me because she genuinely believes she's not playing politics. She genuinely believes the biggest problem in the UK right now is the very small minority of far right thugs that are willing to disrupt. Well, she's willing to chuck everything else, every other piece of evidence into the bin as a result. So we've got this what I believe is kind of a crazed ideological cabinet that are just like it's like they're having a wet dream. This is everything they've wanted. We've got everything we've wanted, and we've got the power to do it. We're going to do it, come what may. This is what people want. It's not what people want. The people that do want it, even some of those people now, I think, are starting to think, "Oh, this is a bit much." If you challenge anyone who, on Twitter or anything about Keir Starmer and the cabinet and what they voted in, they all kind of back out a bit. Well, we needed it because 14 years of Tory, 14 years of Tory. Well, yeah, okay, we all believe that, but the Tories, and particularly Rishi Sunak's version of the Tories, look moderates now. Like
Yeah.
I'm nostalgically looking back to May, thinking,
Yeah.
May was good.
Well, I started to think Starmer was as well, but that's why he kept calling him the Prime Minister. He's looking back to the halcyon days of Rishi Sunak. All is forgiven, Rishi. And that was so. Some people said that his software patch needed updating. That he just, it was like a malfunction. You said Starmer FM. That's quite a funny image. Like, welcome to Starmer FM. Do not listen while driving or operating heavy machinery. It's the most boring. This is a serious radio channel. No laughs whatsoever. Now, I believe you're calling in about the winter fuel pay, but Paul, you can't have it. I mean, the that is ridiculous. Apparently a pensioner on £13,000 could have their fuel allowance of at least £250 removed, but train drivers on an average salary of over £60,000 will get a 14% pay rise over 3 years. That was from Sky News. And you go, yeah, you've got money for your union striking mates. If you go on strike, you'll be rewarded for your already. Let's face it, I'm sure it's a tough job, but you're sat on a train. You don't do that much. It's quite fun. You sit there, cash in your money, get your pension. It's far more stable than what we do, Paul. You're sitting on a train.
Yeah, much more stable. Yeah, these jobs are what I consider sort of aspirational working class jobs. No one wants to. Perhaps the unions did need a little bit more support, just to make sure that our national services were run better. I can understand. I can understand. I can put myself in a position where that type of politics is understandable. What I can't understand is when they are obtuse to absolutely everything else that's going on. So everything they've made a priority at the moment doesn't feel like a priority for me. I mean, when
Yeah, well,
Ed Miliband stood in front of a windmill playing the guitar or faking playing the guitar, that to them they thought was light-hearted. To me, it looked like the start of a dystopian movie where that's it. That's what we've got to look forward to now. None of this is going to make sense apart from those people who
I
want
missed
these
that.
things.
Ed Miliband was standing in front of a windmill playing the guitar.
Well,
That sounds like a
really
weird dream.
really early days of Labour. He sung.
Oh
Oh man,
yeah,
was it
you're right.
even
He's got a
a
little blue
brilliant song?
guitar. What is he doing?
Well, exactly.
Well, it says
Some of this
ukulele
people.
song, but is that a ukulele? It's got 6 strings, or is it a guitar? Anyway, looks like a mini guitar to me rather than a ukulele because it has 6 strings. Now I'm wondering. Now I'm down the rabbit hole of whether was it a guitar or a ukulele. This is what they want. That's
This is
mental.
exactly what I want. Times are a changing, or something like that. I mean, I've blocked. It's like a trauma thing, right? You've
Yeah.
gone through it. It's a big breakup or a death in the family. It was only a few months ago, but I've started to block things out and I feel like I'm doing that every week at the moment. I
Blocking
I
out the
don't
trauma of Starmer's
Yeah,
policy.
just because it feels to me, I've sat down with people, like for a social drink with people I know who see me on GB News and maybe aren't really in tune with the sort of vibe that we've got. They find it too far to the right for them. However, when I start talking about Starmer, Labour, and this particular government, you can sort of see them like, oh yeah, it's like they were, it's like they were supporters of Ted Bundy because they just thought he was a nice, good-looking guy, and then all of a sudden they realise that Ted Bundy is much worse than this kind of articulate, good-looking guy. Not that Starmer's that particularly good-looking, although there were some people in the Guardian who wrote about him being sexually attractive when he got into
Yeah, that
power.
brief, very cringe phase. I'm sure that's over now. He does have good, thick hair. That's my only. That's the only thing that's about the only positive I can say about him. Really, he's quite lucky with the hair. But then again, he's not human. This one really bothered
Uh,
me, and it's not confirmed, but it's anger as Angela Rayner refuses to rule out scrapping council tax exemption for people
oh
living
no,
alone. This one, and I said Labour continues its tireless search for new demographics to alienate. Who haven't we got? The single people living alone. Can we take their council tax? Is there anyone we've done old people, we've done far right thugs, which means every working class person and normal person in the country. Now it's like now let's go after the single. And people are saying, "Oh yeah, this is horrible on old people." I'm like, never mind the old people. What about ND living alone? It's not punishment enough. We have to live these bleak, atomized existences. Like now we're going for your discount. And by the way, if you're living alone, we pay far more anyway because we've got to pay the whole blooming rent and mortgage. That's all on us. All the bills are on us. Yeah, we don't have to live with anyone, and that's good because people are bad. But we get our 25% off this ridiculous council tax. We still pay loads of council tax, and even that, they're going to come for that. But if they come for that, Paul, it's really war. I mean, I was annoyed with everything else. That is war.
the optics are. There's so much about that for me. The optics are ridiculous. Angela Rayner, who is like
Yeah.
the council house tycoon, the lady who stands to have made the most from this particular Thatcherite idea, and she's going to remove it. But she
Yeah.
does for
She's
what
one
reason?
step beyond the single occupant. She's not even in the house that she allegedly lives
Yeah,
in. I'm not even there, so I should get an even bigger discount.
I tell you who would be a great podcast guest.
Yeah.
One of her neighbours, one of the two or three neighbours that come out and said, She's never bloody lived. What are you talking about? We've never seen her. And
Yeah.
they just get them on for an hour to talk about the amount of times they saw Angela.
Yeah, the one who's never seen her does the first half, and then the second half is the one in the building she actually lived who constantly saw her.
Yeah,
And you
that
could
would be
compare
brilliant.
and contrast. Yeah.
That'd be fantastic.
Today we
It's
have Angela Rayner's old neighbour. How's it going? Well, I'm pretty angry. I'm angry about Angela Rayner, obviously. The
also,
whole,
who are the demographic they're
the whole
appealing to?
podcast.
Who are these people? Is there some sort of North London? I don't. Who? They've got a Palestinian flag, guaranteed, somewhere on their person or within their home. They have dyed their hair at some point and questioned their sexuality, even though they know they're straight. So they've been queer for a day at some point and talked about that time that the good-looking boy in high school walked past them and they felt for a moment they may have been gay. But these people, how do they contribute?
You say that, but we'll get onto it later. But they're actually going to vote for the new Corbyn alliance, probably. I mean,
Wow.
they're not. Are they even Labour voters? That's a good question. I mean, who is their voter anymore? Is a good question. I think it's if you look at those graphs, it's basically people on over 70,000 a year. And I've been doing okay recently. The more money I make, the closer I get to voting Labour statistically. But that's not actually the case. I mean, Reform voters. Did you see that graph? The Reform get the most in the under 20,000 a year bracket, and they had like 17%, and it went down as the income went up. And Labour was almost the exact opposite. The more income you had, the more likely you were to vote Labour. So I mean, it's very clear who their demographics are. But yeah, what I suppose it's those people just want Labour because they ideologically want to go back into the EU and things like that. But I can't think he's actually done loads for those people either, has he? Really?
No, and yeah, it's very. It's. I think it's quite revealing actually that those. I didn't realise the demographics and the financial demographics of those two things. The under 20s will be disenfranchised. The under £20,000 a year will be disenfranchised. That's borderline breadline these days. You go back only as far as 10, 15 years ago. 20 grand a year was a reasonable wage for a lot of people, and they could afford to live on that. I mean, they couldn't afford to have luxuries in life, but they could afford to live. Over
Yeah.
70, I think, still is a very, very aspirational, and it takes away a lot of your problems. A lot of the
Yeah.
problems that those disenfranchised have got. Those disenfranchised don't have access to anything other than what the state offers. And if the state is offering a very thinly spread service because there's endless illegal immigration, then of course they're going to be impacted by it. Where for those that are over 70 grand a year, they've got access to anything that they want. They can take on the new two-tier NHS. They can go to Bupa and pay the £200 a year, etc., etc. So I think that's really interesting. I
Well, I
don't know.
mean, maybe not 70. I mean, 70,000 is not what it was because if you look at if you look at inflation, he hasn't changed the tax thresholds. Apparently, like I think I was looking at something the other day that like 50,000, you'd have to earn like 65 for it to be the same as I can't remember now. A few years ago, he hasn't adjusted the tax thresholds. But yeah, no, I'm not in the Labour back. If you look at my wage, I'm somewhere maybe middling in the could be Labour, could be Tory. And if GB goes tits up, I'm suddenly a Reform voter.
Yeah, we're you and I both just down there stopping the boats ourselves.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. From now, it's so funny, yeah,
swimming
because
out.
Tories did well amongst the demographics in the kind of middling range, and Labour, the higher up you did, better you did financially, the more like you were to vote. So I'm somewhere in the Tory, the more, like I say, if things go well, I could get into being a Labour voter, but very easily, GB is going to end in somewhere, and then we'll all be scrabbling in the Reform. But yeah, what about just briefly this approval rating? Just since I mentioned it, this was a piece in the Mail and elsewhere. Keir Starmer's popularity plunges as Brits brace for tax bomb in budget and ban on smoking outside pubs. But Tony Blair urges the PM to ignore social media backlash, and there was a graph where he was doing incredibly poorly in terms of approval rating. But Blair had said you
Yeah,
just
live
have
at
to
60.
ignore these things because in Blair's era you did ignore it, but Starmer, is his approval a problem? I mean, he doesn't seem to, the left hate him for the various reasons we've alluded to do with there's Israel, the winter fuel payment, and then the right hate him for any number of other reasons. So is his approval rating a problem, or should he just ride it out? Like Margaret Thatcher sort of said, oh, it's not low enough yet. Until hers hit a real low, she wouldn't start even listening to it because she said you have to get tough things done. Is it because they're getting tough things done, or is it because he's just a dick?
Well, he's a dick. I mean, those were the options I were giving. So look, he from his perspective, it will look as if it doesn't matter. Minus 16, who cares? I've got 5 years in front of me. I'm in now. Like it or lump it, I'm going to fulfill my manifesto pledges. Which, by the way, he's not fulfilling manifesto pledges because everything feels like they're totally different to what he said he would do. It's like he gaslit us into voting for him. For those who did, and now he's in. I'm going to do whatever I fucking want, and that's exactly what we've got with him at the moment. So we'll feel emboldened by where he is currently. And there isn't anyone within that cabinet that can A, challenge him, or B, think any differently to him. And the way the Labour Party is set up, where you've got Angela Rayner as Deputy Prime Minister because she's voted in by the members, she's untouchable. Okay, Keir Starmer's now untouchable for the time being because he got rid of Corbyn and he got Labour back into power. So they'll feel emboldened, they'll feel in a very strong position. And it's very dangerous for the rest of us because they just feel that they can do whatever they want. I think at some point, however, the balance will tip. If he keeps doing what he's doing, and even those that are in the middle of politics thinking, well, we'll just see how it goes, they start to see how it impacts their elderly parents or their grandparents over the winter, how it starts to squeeze, how the optics of continually saying it is bad, like you're in a toxic relationship, like he's come into a new relationship and said, your previous partner was bad for you. I'm now good for you. Only I know what's right for you, and I'm going to do the right thing. Shh, shh, shh. You know, talkie, you just listen. And it feels like that's exactly where we are, and he feels empowered to do that. I see nothing in him. I see no humanity. I see at best I see a head teacher. He's a prosecutor. He's someone who decides what they're going to do and then he punishes them. The full force of the law. God, when he says that, he's almost ejaculating. The full force of the law. He just loves it, and they're all repeating it. It's incredible. It's very Animal Farm. It's very 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. And it's I'm not sure quite who the Napoleon character is. Probably Keir Starmer, but Snowflake or whatever his name was that went around doing all the bidding for him. That for me is like Yvette Cooper and some of the other cabinet members, maybe Angela Rayner. And this is going to go on for a while until they realise the pigs are sleeping back in the house and they were doing exactly what the humans were doing. And I think a lot of people that really pushed them, the Carol Voldemorts, for instance, she is going.
You're turning it to Dan Wootton. We love Dan, but the Carol Voldemorts, slimy. You have to, every time, because I love Dan the way every time he said it, he always had to say his little slippery start, fishy, like he always had to say his little phrase every time. Just so funny. You just say there, Carol Voldemort. Funny.
These people are going to lose credit because they built all their clout right now on what's happening right now. And she has to sit on LBC on a weekly basis, fielding calls from people who are saying, Keir Starmer's ruining my life. And she's like, she doesn't say anything.
You're struggling with your winter film. Yeah, good point. And she's like, Carol, yeah, exactly. Did you see her laughing bizarrely on Politics Joe?
Yeah.
This weird laugh. It's really weird laugh. That's how it sounded. It sounded like an old man. It sounded like it was like an old man laughing, wasn't it? It was like a hearty old man in a country pub. But it's like she'd looked at Kamala Harris and thought, I know, I'll just take the laugh. I'll take the most annoying thing about Kamala Harris and make it even worse. It was really
There's
weird.
Absolutely no way Carol Voldemort gets away with that if she's unattractive. She's got pretty privilege, 100%. Okay, and we can all take the mickey about she's had this done, she's had that done. She's an attractive human being. Now, if she isn't that, she doesn't get away with any of this. If some ugly person just starts spouting this stuff up, we don't listen to them. Okay, so all these things have a finite amount of time on them. You can only afford so much surgery. Keir Starmer can only be stomached by the country for so long. Labour can only be ruinous for a certain period of time, and then she's gone because all her credibility's gone. If you stand back and try to be a little bit neutral about things and say, well, okay, you and I would never, ever have supported Rishi Sunak. Both of us have talked about him like he was George Best. Oh, remember when football was different back then? He wasn't a good prime minister. I'm not even sure he's a good politician. He's just someone, he'd make maybe a good spin doctor or someone in the background pulling the strings. But the fact that we're talking positively about him so soon after he's gone is testament to how badly Keir Starmer's doing in Labour. And this is just the beginning.
Yeah, yeah,
We're
and
still in the
that we
early
were
stage.
slightly joking, but I know what you mean. And couple of
Yeah, we
things.
were. We were.
I've got the Starmer's ratings. It was disapprove 43%, approve 31%, don't know 5%. Don't know who those people are. And but Blair was urging him to carry on and ignore the backlash. But you see, that was questionable advice because Blair ignoring the backlash to the Iraq War was kind of his downfall, at least in terms of his
Yeah.
legacy. Yes, he got elected again, but the country never really recovered. The apathy level from that is we still see today. It's increased for many other reasons, but we still see today that the so-called apathy party is the winning party if you do a map of the country, i.e., people who don't vote. Now I'd really call it the disenfranchised party. And Blair was a big part of that with the Iraq War and sort of regime just doubling down, doing what it wants, coming up with lies to justify it. So I think it's ignoring the polls. I think it's dangerous. I get the Thatcher thing. You sort of feel like, yes, Thatcher was actually doing good but unpopular things. You feel like Starmer was just doing bad but unpopular things. I think there is a difference. And just on Vorderman, you might be looking at her with slightly rose tinted glasses, but she was back in the day, though. I mean, yes, Vorderman back in the day. I'm not sure now, and that kind of reminds me of our next topic, which I wanted to get into, which is Oasis, because they're
Yeah.
back, and that was and we all want to go back to the Oasis time, which was a much better time objectively. But Starmer's managed to ruin this moment as well. I mean, he managed to get it was such bad politics. He managed to get a headline on the Mirror: Keir versus Oasis. Starmer proposes clampdown on Gallagher's dynamic pricing. And this is the Mirror, who you think would be sympathetic. So he managed to get on the wrong side of the Oasis issue. I mean, Blair had Oasis literally meeting Noel Gallagher, and it was like, yeah, Britpop, cool, Britannia. And he could ride on this vibes. It was all pure vibes, even if it didn't really add up to anything. Whereas Starmer's being handed this gift, and he still manages to balls it up. And Lisa Nandy sounds like she wants to nationalize Oasis. She's sort of talking about, oh, it's depressing you. You're in the queue for ages, and then you get there, and then it's much more than they said, and we need to do something about it. She talked about it, we need to sort of somehow. They sound like they just want to do some sort of. I call it like an Oasis tax. They want to tax the successful bands and redistribute it to the crap bands that no one likes, or something like that. They want to, yeah, okay, ticket prices, it's not perfect, but the way they're talking about it, they sound like they want to nationalize Oasis. It's absolutely mental. What do you think to any of that?
Well, brilliant. Such that should be a thing, nationalising Oasis, because that's exactly what it is. What they've is weirdly like the politics of envy again. So they're criticising, they're taking something successful and criticising it for capitalising on its success, which of course is very conservative. It is very conservative. There is some distance between Oasis the band and what happens on the ticket selling sites. And dynamic ticketing is something I hadn't heard of until this weekend. And it the way it justifies and validates itself is that they sold out 1.4 million tickets. So people were willing to do it. Now, I saw all sorts of people on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, friends of mine that I went to see Oasis with a few times back in the day. Um, they were in and they were saying, "Look, I've got, I'm in, and my ticket price is going to be either somewhere between 100 and 300 pounds," and they were willing to pay that for one event. And that's what the market's all about. Now, if you take that away, and rightly so, what does it look like? I say rightly so. What I mean, it's legitimate to take that away and try and do something else to make it fairer. But why? What does it need to look like? What does rock and roll and fun and pleasure need to look like for it to fit into Lisa Nandy's version of the world? Who cares? If a ticket cost, didn't have the same outrage when it was Swifty. When people, when young kids were paying £300 to go and see Taylor Swift.
Yeah,
But it's
Starmer went.
exactly Starmer went, and it's the type of
I
people.
enjoy
Make no
Taylor
doubt about
Swift. The music, I relate to music about breaking up with young men, and it's very serious. It was. It's very. Yeah, sorry. I just can't imagine Starmer at the Taylor.
Absolutely not. And he probably just sat at the back, enjoying the free buffet, or sharing it out, sharing the free buffet. I don't know,
Do you think there's a
but
free buffet at Taylor Swift? I imagine everything's like incredibly expensive.
yeah. Well, I mean, for him in his box,
Here's
because
like Taylor's
ultimately,
hair. This is one of Taylor's genuine hairs. $5,000. Can you just imagine like the merchandise at Swift? I just imagine it's all overpriced. I'm making this up completely, but I'm pretty sure I'm
well,
right.
it's successful capitalists that pay for socialism, and it's successful capitalists that pay for Keir Starmer and his people to enjoy themselves. And Keir, what he's doing here, Lisa and Andy are talking about here, they're talking about the type of people. They think that they're protecting the working classes. We already know they don't care about the working classes. They are totally disengaged with the type of people that might go and watch Oasis. We know this because everybody that would vote for them are writing articles in the Guardian. There was that, I think his name's Stuart Price. Well, we might come to that in a minute, but I urge anyone just go and
Simon
read
Price,
that.
yeah.
For Simon Price, I urge anyone to read that just for a giggle. He's made the entire thing about him and his sexuality and his minority, and he basically looks like me with a funny haircut. He's not, if he brushes his hair, he's never going to be marginalised. There's no problem. No one cares about people and their sexuality anymore. And the fact that he reminds me of the people that when I was big into Oasis in the late '90s, the fringe element that would say this was bad because, it was just sour grapes. And I don't think Lisa and Andy, and I don't think the Labour Party are doing anything. They don't want to be seen to do anything that supports really the sort of people that go and see Oasis. So it's not about them. It's about making a point. I mean, this Oasis for Keir versus Oasis. There's only one winner, isn't there? I mean, I would pay 300 quid. I'd go and buy a dynamic sold ticket to watch Oasis fight Keir Starmer.
Yeah, I mean, there is that feeling that Oasis could come out and be vaguely quite anti-Starmer, or not even vaguely. They fall. The instinct is they fall on the wrong side, meaning the good side of the culture war, because you got things like Noel, that clip going around about him talking about masks. Fucking bollocks, mate. What, I've got to wear it, and now suddenly, what, the virus has gone. Now I've got a sandwich. It's bollocks, and he's just completely right about masks. Liam said loads of things over the years. That Simon Price article you mentioned had some really fun. I mean, in 2016 on Twitter, this is from the Guardian article by Simon Price. He, meaning Liam Gallagher, called Russian football hooligans batty boys, and in 2018 used another homophobic slur, bum chums, against Noel, Johnny Marr, and Paul Weller. It's hard to read that without laughing. That's a brother saying that his brother is bum chums with Johnny Marr and Paul Weller. I mean, that is. It would take Keir Starmer not to laugh at that. Bum chums is a homophobic slur. It's completely unacceptable to say bum chums. Keir, stop saying it. I just want to say bum chums should never be used. Bum chums is a funny phrase, and I'm sorry.
Yes,
Every gay person agrees with me.
Oh, for sure. No one has any real problem with bum chums. They might have with Batty Boy. We're talking about someone here who made his money. He came from a small house. The brothers came from a small house on a Mancunian council estate. They weren't taught how to talk to talk Starmer's language. And one thing about Tony Blair, he was a smooth operator. He understood this very quickly. When he got into power, he understood what was popular. People talk about populism now. Tony Blair was the king of populism. I mean, that opening his doors to Brit pop in 1996 or 7, whenever it was, that wasn't for the North London intelligentsia.
You pronounced it like my dad would. Brit pop. You put this weird emphasis. Computer games.
I don't know why I emphasised. I never called it that either. I always found that was derogatory.
You got too old. You've hit that stage where you start pronouncing words weirdly.
It's not even. I just don't like the idea that it was popular music, even though it was, because at the time pop was like, I don't know, the Spice Girls, whatever it might be, Bewitched. It wasn't Oasis as far as I was concerned. Oasis to me at that point, so
that's
16
Brit rock.
to 18. Yeah, it was a way of life, Nick. I lived that way.
Do you know what, Paul? Just occasionally, when I'm really just on my own, just having a bit of fun, I'll stick on a track will come on Spotify, and then it'll just lead to all these other Britpop tracks. And I'll just go through every Britpop, and I'll identify the track within like nanoseconds. Not even.
Oh yeah.
If I can just say, Blue Tones. I'm like Blue Tones. I'll be like, I'll just be on my own playing this game.
7,
yeah.
They all come to you, and then you know all the words.
Yeah. Did I tell you about
Slight
Shed 7?
By the Blue Tones.
Was I talking to you about Sled? Because I did, so when you're a youngster, right? Now, some people won't get this reference if they're international. I have a massive international audience. But if you're the exact right age and country, you'll know that Shed 7 were massive. They had Going for Gold was probably their biggest track. And when you're young, you think, oh, all these people are going to be famous and rich forever. They're massive. Like, you think they're massive. But then you look at like the lead singer of Gene ended up working in a film archive. And then Shed 7, I was in Edinburgh doing a show, not even in a good venue, like one of the cheap venues. And I was upstairs and it was like, okay, it was adequate for that. But you know what Edinburgh's like, it was kind of
Yeah.
dingy. And then in the
Oh,
room, in the same venue as me, at a worse time slot, was I can't remember either the drummer or the bassist from Shed 7. And I was like,
yeah.
you fall into the level of like, Nick's comedy room. And I wasn't even doing, massively well in comedy at the time. I was like, hang on, you realize, most bands don't make it. I mean, what happened to Echo Belly? I mean, Louise Wenny used to follow me briefly from Sleeper. What happened to Menswear? I always thought Menswear, do you remember them? They were the ultimate,
Yeah.
like, we're just putting a Britpop band together in an afternoon, cut and paste. They could be a bit like Suede, a bit like what we call Menswear. It was so, they had like one track, Daydreamer, I believe it was called. But I mean, do you remember any of these really obscure Britpop bands? It's one of my favorite
Oh,
things,
yeah. I mean,
obscure Britpop
well,
bands.
if they we're a similar age, Nick, and it resonates, doesn't it, when you're a teenager forming your own music tastes, and I think it was sort of quite. I mean, obviously now we're older and we look at the back catalogue of music that influenced all those bands, especially Oasis, and sometimes that's the criticism aimed at them, and you could see where it came from. And why not emulate it? It worked well for them. Their first two albums are standalone great albums. You can argue after that as much as you like, but those first two albums were standalone great albums, and that perpetuated them into the stardom that they're in. And the first gig I ever saw was Nebworth in 1996. It was my first gig. It was the first time I ever saw Oasis play, and it was a huge event. It's like over the weekend was 250,000 people, 125,000 each day.
Right.
It was the Taylor Swift of their time, but it was a movement. Taylor Swift doesn't really mean anything. You know, it's popular music that's fun, and maybe people who are quite feminine can enjoy it.
Mm.
But what Oasis did is
How dare you?
it validated that kind of rebellious teenage stage that I was going through at the time. And I think what we're going to see is a similar thing next year. And I think people will coalesce around these events. I think these events, what you're going to see is that, you know, when you see Glastonbury now and they say, "Oh, we hate the Tories," and stuff like that, and everyone cheers, we are going to see that, but just much more angry in the "we hate Labour, we hate the Starmer" movement, and it's just going to it's not going to help Starmer. Lisa Nandy is not fighting for the people. They're going to be shouting "we hate Lisa Nandy" in about
Mm.
12 months' time
So
in Wembley Stadium.
I'm picturing a kind of photo negative of the Blair era, basically like Oasis on stage at Wembley, and Noel's going "fuck Starmer," and like it's kind of like the opposite of Cool Britannia. It's like yeah, that's interesting. I mean, they did. By the way, just quickly, there was a thing that resurfaced. Liam had written on Twitter in 2017, $350 to go and see our kid in USA. What a c word. When will it all stop? As you were LG. So there's always a tweet. It's still very funny, but yeah, I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
he was talking about ticket
so
prices, so some
Simon
people said
Price
hypocrisy.
criticised he criticised Noel for calling Labour communists. Keir, Corbyn in particular, and I think Ed Miliband as well. He called them communist.
Fucking
And from
communists, yeah,
yeah, so from Simon Price's perspective, this was a ghastly thing to say. From most people's perspective, they thought that's
accurate.
what it is.
Yeah,
What
yeah,
are you talking about? It's
yeah.
madness. Of course, the most communist leader of our time, the only communist leader in our time of the opposition, has been Jeremy Corbyn. There's nothing controversial about that.
Yeah.
Him and all of his followers set about trying to create sort of a neo-communism in the UK. And the reason that they lost 2019 so badly was because of that. I know people will hate this, particularly not on our side of the argument, but the only reason they did so well in 2017 was because Theresa May was leading the campaign and she did terribly,
True.
utterly
She was
terribly.
awful. Yeah, and she messed up Brexit. I mean, but Paul, I mean, yeah, by the way, another thing in the Simon Price piece is it's no coincidence that Oasis are the band of choice for flag shaggers and reform voters. I think he means you, Paul. I think that's
Yeah,
aimed right at you. You
it
almost said
is.
the people's gammon. I mean, it's so funny that Oasis could become. I mean, that Guardian article is actually helping this along. They could become the culture war divider. They could be the thing that takes down the Labour government on our side of the culture war. That'd be so funny because you didn't really think of them like that. Of course, they were Tony Blair. They were they fit in perfectly with New Labour, even if they didn't really because they were actually working class versus New Labour perhaps wasn't about that. But somehow, Blair brilliantly co-opted them, and Starmer's perfectly alienated them. So they could take the government down. There's one thing that I think Simon Price gets right, which is the lyrics can be a bit dodgy. This is my one criticism. Because, by the way, I had the cassette of Park Life, and my brother had Definitely Maybe. So I sort of took the Blur
Oh,
side.
right.
But then I liked Oasis, but we liked the Stone Roses, which was cooler. I was playing all the John Squire stuff on the guitar. I went to see the Seahorses
Beautiful.
live just for Squire, even though it's not a
Brilliant.
good band. And I was playing all Stone Roses. Then I got into Ben Folds 5, and it was all over. Guitars were over for me. It was piano, and that was the best live gig I saw. Ben Folds 5 '99. But we don't want to go too far down memory lane and reveal our ages. But the one thing I will say is the lyrics, Paul, can be hit and miss. I mean, think about this for a minute. Because I've been standing at the station in need of education in the rain. I can live with that. You're at the station, you're a callow youth at the station. You don't know much about the world. You're out there needing education. You're like, okay, and it's probably raining because it's Manchester. Okay, I can live with that. You made no preparation for my reputation once again. I mean, okay, you know what I'm like. I show up, and I don't get everything right. I'm a bit of an idiot. You should know that by now. I can live with that as well. Okay. The sink is full of fishes. She's got dirty dishes on the brain. I can actually live with that as a surreal lyric. I think that might be the best lyric. It's surreal. She's got chores on her brain. She's in a flat, probably in Manchester. It's raining. There's fish in the sink. Not literally, but that's how it feels. I can totally live with that. Now, here's where it goes wrong. It was overflowing gently, but it's all elementary, my friend. Now, overflowing gently clearly now is just word association from the sink. Because what the hell does it was overflowing gently mean? And then, but it's all elementary. I'm aware that's a Sherlock Holmes reference, but what is it doing there? It just because it, and then you realize, okay, the whole thing's been done with a rhyming dictionary. But not a very good rhyming dictionary because he's trying to actually rhyme brain with friend.
Oh
I
my.
mean, look, in need of education in the rain, fine. For my reputation was a gain. Dirty dishes on the brain. It's all elementary. My free friend. That doesn't even rhyme. So, and it means nothing. So this is my problem with Oasis. Then sometimes Noel will come out with a song like Half the World Away, and you're like, oh, he can write lyrics. But then the rest of the time, there'll just be like horrific rhyming
Yeah.
dictionary bollocks. So what is that valid or is that just completely irrelevant? Is it
No,
all
it's
just a
absolutely valid. I feel like it's a gotcha moment. You were anti Oasis and anti me, and you've got me on here to talk about Oasis, and then you've brought out the trump card, which is some of the lyrics, which we've all forgotten about, because there's some of them,
that's the
some of
gotcha?
them do read like the sort of music I try to write. Lyric, I can't write music. Sort of lyric I tried to write after being into Oasis for about a year, and it would just be about rhyming with things that are on the floor of my bedroom and just continually trying to make them seem philosophical in some way. You know how a sock on its own would mean that's me because I've just split up my girlfriend and I don't know where the other sock is, and that other sock has left me. And that was literally the theme of one of the songs I wrote. The greatest claim to fame I ever had is there was a girl at school I liked. Her first name was, oh, she's passed away now. God bless her. Actually, so her name was Jodie, and I really wanted to impress her. So I wrote all the lyrics of Don't Look Back in Anger. But when the album had come out, because it was in the sleeve, but before the song had been released. And for about a 3-week period, she thought I was potentially a genius until the song came out. And then my whole reputation was ruined.
Right.
Um, there are,
I've just said
there
Half
are,
the World Away is better. It's actually not that great. It feels like it is because of the song, the way the
it's
song's
the
put together.
emotion, Nick.
The
It's
emotion,
the
yeah, the lyrics
emotion.
still aren't that good. And of course, the other criticism was I was big into guitar, I still am, but it was my life when I was a teenager. I was buying like 3 guitar magazines a month, and there was like articles on how Oasis stole all their riffs. Something like because Half the World Away actually is an REM title as well. But if you talk about guitar riffs, Morning Glory is stolen directly from the one I love and things like that. Of course, Noah would probably just own it and say, yeah, does he fucking own G to E minor? Fucking so what? It probably doesn't care, but they just stole all their riffs as well. None of this matters because, they still rocked. They still got some great tracks and they're just
Yes.
Oasis. They got a great. So Carl Benjamin was saying that Noel's a much better singer than Liam, and Liam doesn't even do anything. It's like, no, Liam's the charisma, and he has a powerful voice. It's a different type of voice. Noel's great on the backing vocals. Things like "Stand by Me" really works well, and so yeah, you'd need Liam, don't you? I think it's wrong to say he doesn't bring anything. He brings an awful lot, and Noel brings the songs. And what was annoying as a kid was their guitar lines were very, very simple. The lead guitar was very simple. You got Bonehead, whose whole job was just to play bar chords, which incredibly boring role just to fill out the
What a
sound.
He was the Bez. He was the Oasis Bez.
Yeah,
No, Bez was just there to dance and play the
true.
tangerine or whatever. Tambourine. But
You felt like they were bringing along their mates for the ride, which is kind of nice in a way, isn't it? Like, we'll get you some money as well.
oh man, it's yeah, exactly. Bez. I think I made something. I wrote something about Bez being in Happy Mondays now. Sean Ryder just took his best mate with him. That's what he did. He found a space for him. That's true friendship. He added nothing to that band, but let me tell you something. The one, if you know anything about the Happy Mondays and you've seen them live, what you remember more than anything is Bez prancing around on stage. It's like a whole thing going on, you know. And then he invented a way of moving. It felt like sort of something that moved its way out of house music or whatever was going on at the hacienda into what became, the Mancunian rock scene of the 90s. And they're all seminal because even though they're not necessarily original, they're seminal in our minds because they were seminal to us, and it's what inspired us. And I think that's what's magic about it. It did bring everyone. Sometimes I equate it to things like comedy. A lot of people will say, Peter Kay or whoever or Michael McIntyre is not the genius that other people see them as. But what they've been able to do is consolidate what the geniuses do and package it in a way that makes it commercial and relatable to the masses. So, and there's a genius in that as well, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, I think I got too carried away as well with some of my down the rabbit hole of guitar and Oasis and stuff. But very interesting. We're both from that era, and good luck to them. And I hope they destroy Starmer with pure Gallagher energy. And this doesn't really link, but I think we should do the Tory leadership race. I mean, no one really cares, but I've been watching all the speeches just because I feel it's my job. And I mean, the public really doesn't care. And there was a piece, and this is in the Guardian, to be fair, but basically no one knows who any of these people are. So, asked who had the best chance of winning the next election for the Tories, 70% of respondents to this thing the Guardian did either said they did not know or that they thought none of the candidates could win, with James cleverly given the greatest chance on 8%, followed by Priti Patel. I love the idea they're just so bad none of them win. It's just a void.
Well, that's
We've called it
communism,
off.
isn't it? That's competition in communism, isn't it?
Yeah.
Everybody finishes first, or as it is second.
Or last in this case. But
yeah.
I watched all the speeches. Priti Patel, well, I mean, she's incredibly hot, let's be honest. I mean, there's that thing for is it misogynist, Paul, to say she's hot? I was watching that old Brexit and Uncivil War film, the one with where Cumberbatch plays Dominic Cummings. And there was some real footage from that of Priti Patel in 2016. She was insanely hot then. Now she's still hot. She was, I mean, I met her at GB. She like winked at me, which I thought like, that's bold. And then our producer said she'd also winked at him. I was like, she just winks at blokes she meets. I mean, that's a high charisma, high confidence move, isn't it? She just
Are we double sure she hasn't got a tick?
she just winks. She just said she meets you and she does a wink. It's just like that is pretty bold. I mean, but she's obviously a confident person, and she's definitely the most attractive of the list. If we're going to go down that route, which of course would not be terrible.
Yeah, so she wins. She does win that. She is someone I'm always like. If I sit at home watching GB News in the evening, I see Priti Patel's on, and I've not in the studio that time. I'm always a bit disappointed because I've never been there when she's been there. I used to feel that way a little bit about Pat Sharp from the Funhouse, but I've actually seen him there now.
Didn't see that coming.
And gone up into the height.
She's very small, Paul. Unbelievably small.
She is.
Yeah.
She is. She is beautiful. I agree. Look, we
beautiful. We sound like this is the kind of thing that got people in trouble at GB. Beautiful woman. This is terrible. We shouldn't. We're only doing the equivalent to what all those people did when they wrote those pieces about Starmer being. Does anyone else think Starmer's kind of sexy? It's like, oh my god, they were awful. We're only doing the male equivalent of that. We're just being fair.
And, we're all human. I don't want to. Everyone's got their thing.
Except Starmer.
But pretty. Yeah, exactly. Look, when you look, we understand conservative politics better than the average person on the street. Probably, I'd like to think we do. However, even we were talking before we came on air to record this, and I kept saying, I know there's 6 of them, but I can never remember who the 6th one is, which is Mel Stride.
Yes.
And I don't even remember listening to an interview or watching something with him on. So he feels like it's just been. They didn't want Um,
Much of Mel Stride's family don't even know who Mel Stride is.
well, they didn't want Suella Braverman, so they basically found anyone who could fill the sixth place, so they could even up the race in some way.
Do you know what's funny, Paul?
That
I
could be
just
really.
googled Mel Stride. Do you know what comes up first? Who is Mel Stride? It's a Telegraph piece titled "Who is Mel Stride?" Shadow Work and
Well,
Pension Secretary, a low-key member of Sunak's cabinet, describes himself as dark horse of leadership. He was too dark because you're not even there. You're like it was pitch black. No, no, so you're right. If he comes through, we'll look pretty stupid now. If he's like the ultimate dark horse and comes through from no, I mean, it's been done. John Major came through when people thought it was going to be Heseltine, but that's very dark though. But I thought he was going to drop
yeah, it would
out
be
today as we
interesting.
record, but he hasn't.
It would be interesting if he did, because everyone would be scrambling to try and find out as much as they possibly can about him.
He
I
was
don't know
working.
enough
He comes
about
up
him.
when the benefit. Sorry to interrupt. He comes up when the benefit stuff comes up because he always wants to cut benefits. That's his sort of role. And I watched the whole interview with him with Camilla Tominey. I'm still really none the wiser. He just sounded like a kind of normal Tory, just being slightly careful on immigration. He's not really saying anything. But a lot of them are like that. I don't want to single him out. My take on Priti Patel was that her speech was okay. It was a little wooden. It was okay. It was kind of she presided over this massive increase in immigration. That's a big problem for her.
Yeah,
I'm not sure she can really get out of that. But some people have heard of her. Is her advantage, though. It doesn't particularly matter with the members who you think would have heard of all of them. So I'm not really sure about. I don't think she wins it, to be honest. Um, Kemi Badenoch gets 48% in a Telegraph poll of who should be next leader. Jenrick is second but only on 17%. So she's a massive favourite for Telegraph anti-woke libs, really. I mean, that's what I would call them, but I suppose that some people would call them on the right. She does speak well. She's very smart. I watched her speech. It was a lot shorter than the other ones and to the point. She talked about being an engineer, and you sort of think that's great for getting things done. I'm not totally sure it's a leader that you want the engineer mindset. Maybe it's a better person to have as a number two or behind the scenes. She's known to be confrontational and blunt. And to me, one problem I've got is a bit more idiosyncratic, perhaps, but she's associated to me with this anti-woke liberal, but not an actual conservative, who will then suddenly default to identity politics when it suits them, as she did when attacking that idiot actor, what's he called, the Doctor Who guy, David Tennant, who was
yeah.
terrible and said that she shouldn't exist and all this awful stuff. But then she said, "Oh, you're a rich white male." You're like, "Oh, there's the white male thing," and she hangs around with other people who say similar things. I think she might be associated with that Anaya person who wrote a piece attacking me and Spike saying, "Does anyone really think DEI is anti-white?" Which, of course, it explicitly is. That's the whole point of it. But I don't really trust her on certain issues. I don't really trust her on immigration. But she is very smart, and she did come across well in the speech, and she is a massive favourite according to the Telegraph, at least. What do you think?
Yeah, I would say that from my little knowledge and understanding of what's going on in the background, Kevin Badenoch was the favourite before it started and remains the favourite probably amongst some of the members. But I don't think what it feels as a slight smear against her. Uh, every time she builds momentum, it feels like a slight smear against her from the parliamentary Conservative Party, not from the membership. So, and of course, they're going to play a big role in this. They feel like they got their fingers burned when Liz Truss got in, and they did all that they wanted Rishi Sunak. And of course, that's exactly what they got. And did they manufacture that? I think she gifted them an opportunity to do that by trying to squeeze 5 years of economics into 5 weeks. But that's a whole other episode. Um, Robert Jenrick, for me, is coming out as someone who is saying a lot of good. I liked Priti Patel's speech. The one thing I don't think she covered well was her involvement in mass immigration. She probably had to address that. She didn't address that. She spoke very well about other things. But because that's such a hot button topic at the moment, she probably should have said, I was involved in that. We should do things differently. And that would have been enough because it would have been acknowledgement. I'm not sure whether she did that or didn't. I can't remember it verbatim, but it felt to me as if she obfuscated when it came to that point.
Okay.
Um,
What about Cleverly? Because I actually watched his
no.
whole speech, and maybe I was just less tired because I was thinking I played football. I went back to playing football last night. It was the first game of the new season, and I fell asleep in my chair after because it was a hard game. We were 3-0 down, came back to win, and I was watching some of the speeches then, and I fell asleep. But the one I liked, maybe I was less tired. And when I say liked, let's not get carried away. I mean purely in terms of his delivery was James Cleverly. Now I'd never vote for Cleverly, so let's everyone calm down. All these candidates are far too lefty for me, but let's I wouldn't even vote Tory. But let's say Sorry to David Frost. Um, but do you know who came across the best to me just in the speech was James Cleverly, because he just, he's got that sort of bloke thing. He's like a normal bloke. He spoke confidently and well, and he though I didn't the content was questionable because he kept talking about capitalism. I've got nothing against free market, all good, but it was just like a slightly outdated sounding speech that didn't really address the pressing problems now, which I would start with immigration. If it was me, I'd hammer immigration, both legal and illegal, and then I'd get onto all the other stuff, cost of living, NHS, and all that, and I just hammer the main points. Whereas all this talk about we need to get back to capitalism, that is important, but it was kind of slightly strange, outmoded talk. It was just Thatcherite talk, which is fine, but it doesn't really address the current moment to me. But in terms of pure delivery and charisma, I actually thought he did the best.
Yeah, I think it was a good speech, but that's one of the reasons it wouldn't get my vote at all. I put him in the same ilk as your Rishi Sunaks, even your Boris Johnsons. These are people that have run on the blue ticket, the Conservative ticket, for years, but aren't Conservative. And I don't see any good coming of that. I see us returning back to where the Conservatives were. I'm not saying that he's not a bright man, that he couldn't achieve things, but I just don't see the change there. And this thing about running on the blue ticket, we've just seen so much of this with the Tories. Okay, they are not conservative enough, and it is a worry that a lot of the rhetoric is about coming towards the centre ground. Obviously, the centre ground doesn't exist. The common ground exists. There is common ground amongst voters, but there is this myth of, I used to pretend for years I was a centrist. But the thing about being a politician is you need to nail, sorry, your colours to that political mast. You need to say, this is what I am, this is what I believe in. And if you're in the Tory party, it needs to be conservative and you need to stand by that. I see a lot of that with Jenrick. I see a lot of that with Badenoch. I see some of that with Priti Patel. And, people could accuse her of being a part of the James Cleverly gang as well. But for me, James Cleverly is someone who just harks back to those people that just in the end ruined the Conservative Party on the basis that they just had lost their identity, completely lost their identity, and didn't know what to stand by. Now, you can say that we can criticise Keir Starmer, as we rightly have done, but we know what Keir Starmer's identity is. It's authoritarianism, it's socialism, it's no fun, it's bad, bad, bad. Okay, but but that's his identity. It is Keir Starmer FM. We know exactly what it is for him. We know what he stands for. He's a prosecutor. He's a bully at school. He's the prosper. He's the person who got bullied at school and would love to have been a bully. What we get with someone like James Cleverly is someone who is very astute at seeing which way the political winds are blowing, and just hanging on to them against any ticket that he wants. To some degree, the only person who's ever done that successfully is Tony Blair. The reason they created New Labour is because they didn't believe in old Labour. The one reason that people like me in 97, 98 and 99 were totally enamoured with Tony Blair and the Labour Party is because we probably came from a working class background and we thought they were trying to achieve the things that we believed were trying to be achieved in the 80s behind, Margaret Thatcher. Against Margaret Thatcher, but behind the backdrop of Margaret Thatcher, and that wasn't happening. I was too young and naive politically at that point, and who knows if I've changed, but I feel like I have. That to have identified that, I can see those things now. James Cleverly for me is a wily fox, but not who the Conservative Party need. The Conservative Party need a conservative thinker, a conservative leader. And also, if that came in the shape of Priti Patel or Kemi Badenoch, and I hate to say this, it plays right into the DNI hands. It's brilliant. It's the antidote to. It's all the boxes ticked, but on the other side of politics. And that is going to be a problem for Labour because Labour talk the talk. They love DNI. It's pornography to them. It's, you DNI. That's what they look up online. DNI Hub. It's their favourite. But when someone like Priti Patel or Kemi Badenoch or someone of that ilk get in and tick all of those boxes, they don't know what to do with it. They really don't know what to do with it.
Yeah,
And
I've
if
heard
those
that.
people are Tory as well,
I've heard that
it'll be
argument.
really
I don't
interesting.
know if it really makes a difference, but the problem is someone like Kemi. I don't know. She has talked about Nigeria a lot. You do wonder. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it is a weapon against Labour. I'm not sure. On the other point,
I'm not sure.
go on.
One thing I would sum up by saying, though, is there is no one in there that inspires me.
Mm-hmm.
There is no one in there that inspires me. It feels like no one is. Robert Jenrick does, and that surprised me when Robert Jenrick joined the race. I just thought, and also ran, but I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure. I think that he's capable of winning, and he has said some things that are new and interesting.
I've always had him
Um,
down as the likely winner, just because I saw him coming through as the semi-dark horse, not as dark as Mel Stride, who's too dark to be seen. But Kemi being and this is not about their skin, by the way, but Kemi is the leader, so she's got the problem of being the front runner. I thought, yeah, General could come through as a semi-dark horse. Who people who follow it know about him. He's got a serious plan on immigration. Not saying he'll do it. Not saying it'll be enough. But he grasped that problem more, having resigned because of that issue under Sunak. The criticism is, oh, he can't just suddenly change from being a wet to suddenly being a red pilled hardcore actual conservative. But he does seem to have gone through a bit of a change. He'd be my choice of a bad bunch, and not offending him when I say a bad bunch, but it's the Tories, isn't it? But Blair, just because you mentioned him there, his genius was always to talk about things as if they were a foregone conclusion. So he'd say globalization is inevitable. You may as well try and fight the weather. But then he'd say, like, we're trying to just help you through it. That's the point that he didn't do as well as conveying. He's claiming that now on this BBC interview just released. He's like, no, we're just trying to help. We were just saying it's going to happen, but we're just helping it be as pain free as it can for you. I'm going to do this to you, Paul, but I'm going to make it as pain free as possible. It's kind of what you say. But he listed a load of things he did, and they were all awful. He was like devolution, awful. We have a mayor in London. Well, Sadiq Khan's been a disaster, and it allows people like Khan. But he did say as well that Brexit has allowed, instead of like a skilled European labourer who might actually help the country, it's allowed entire sort of African and Asian families and stuff. But he said, why is that better? He did say that, which was sort of quite a base thing to say. So Blair's been awful for the country, but you're back to realizing he wouldn't be as bad as most of the people we've had. And
one,
go on.
the one, sorry, Nick, the one thing about this leadership race which has been most damaging is it's removed the opposition in UK politics. Where
Yes.
on earth is the opposition right now? Think of the things that have been happening.
Yeah.
It's been a catastrophe in
Maybe
many
that's why Starmer
ways.
thinks Rishi's still PM, because he hasn't been there as the leader of the opposition. He's been as absent as Joe Biden. I think they're both on holiday together.
Wherever those people go,
They've
just an
been completely
island
absent.
with.
You're absolutely right. On the riots, we wanted someone to say, hey, maybe these aren't just far right thugs, but no one from the Tories. They're completely absent. You're right. There was one or two issues they spoke up on. Maybe, was it Winterfield? I saw some comments on certain issues, but they didn't speak up on the riots. They were completely absent. They've got this ridiculous contest going on until November, which many people like cleverly have basically hinted that they agree is nonsense, but it's just how it is. They've all hinted that pretty much. Well, not all of them, but definitely cleverly hinted that. And he said, but he did say there was the best comment of the whole speech. He said, "Look, I'm not someone who really, whines about the rules. I accept the rules of the game as they are. I just win." And I was like, that was actually a baller thing to say. That was kind of like army baller, kind of like alpha thing. He was just like, "I just win," and that was actually his best moment, I thought. But yeah, the rules are what they are, but it means they'll be just dicking around amongst themselves until November. And last time they did that, they
So
ousted the person who won anyway. So you go, why are they
yeah,
bothering?
I really don't. I can understand why they're taking their time because they do have time, but they've completely neglected their role as opposition. And a lot of things that have been said about the riots are, by Labour. So the far right element was there. There was thuggery, but it was a small minority. What they were able to do was set the tone. They were able to say that basically, or give the impression that everybody was a far right thug, and therefore entirely undermine the argument that people are worried about illegal immigration and what it's doing. And it's gaslighting the nation because we can see things happening and they're saying what you can see is not true. And they've been able to set the tone. So it makes it very difficult if there's no opposition to come in after that because you give a couple of days between Labour saying everyone's far right thugs and then the opposition speaking, it's very difficult to argue because by that time that message is set in and then you're playing politics. You say, "Oh, I don't want to go against what everybody else is thinking." Well,
Yeah.
yes, they were far right, weren't
Farage talked about it a bit, but even he has been semi-absent, I feel, and the Tories have been completely absent. And you get the impression they probably just agreed on the riots. But Farage, I think, has even been a little bit absent. Tice has been okay, weirdly, but I say that because Richard's been on this show. I don't want to diss Tice. What I mean is he's actually not the leader now, but he's actually almost been doing better messaging. That's what I mean. Um, One person we haven't mentioned is Tom Tugendhat because he's not particularly worth mentioning. I tried to
they?
watch
Yeah.
his speech, And I tried to watch, and there was a couple of problems. One, there was filming problems with it on every channel. I watched it on the Telegraph or Sky. I kept changing, and they all had problems where he kept freezing and he kept being blurry, and you just couldn't hear the speech. In the end, I gave up. And the content of it as well. The filming wasn't his fault, but the content was also totally bland. And so to me, I'm just like, Tugendhat's probably someone recognized him in this poll as like the most prime ministerial, or some people were saying, okay, at least he's yes, maybe he's the best at pretending to just be a serious politician, or maybe that's what he is. But again, the messaging's far too wet on basically everything. He claims now he'll leave the ECHR if necessary, but he's definitely on the One Nation side, so-called the wet side. And I just can't watch him, partly because of the technical issues, but I find it hard to just take in anything he's saying because it's just so bland. What do you think?
Yeah, Tom Tugendhat. I mean, from everything I understand, anecdotally, really nice guy, top guy. Lots of people have got some very nice things to say about him. I think when we talk about, or things I've spoken about being need to run on a blue ticket and be blue, Tom Tugendhat does not fit into that whatsoever. And that's just my opinion. I think that's where the success comes from in opposition in the UK, because Starmer and the Starmer Labour are so far in one direction that you cannot be in the centre. Because in order to bring it back to common ground, you need to be right of centre. Just in order to, they've gone so far over to the left in some of this stuff. Like I say, it's the politics of scorn. It's identifying groups you don't like and making policies to attack those people. They're producing policies like they're still in opposition without realizing they're now in charge. They're now the leaders. They're now governing. They're not really governing though. And I think it's more than a Freudian slip for him to call Rishi Sunak the prime minister 3 times today. It feels like he just doesn't. He just is yet to understand what his role is. I think that's because again, there's been zero opposition. It's like
Yeah.
he's been playing at it. He's been playing a simulator VR game where he's the prime minister and he's getting away with anything he wants, and he started to believe it.
He definitely doesn't have the personality to be prime minister of the country. He kept talking about he put country before party, but he's done the exact opposite. Just on Tom Tugendhat, he did throw Roger Scruton under the bus, the late Sir Roger Scruton, one of our foremost conservative thinkers, as did Johnny Nelson. Is that his name? And as did is that his name? Have I just named the boxer? Who's the who's? I'm worried I've just
I
named
don't know
the
this story.
huh?
I don't know this story.
Yeah. Okay, so Roger Scruton was sort of cancelled by the New Statesman, and Johnny Mercer. I just named a boxer instead, which shows sort of my level. So then he was cancelled by three conservatives. Jumped on the pylon. One of them was Johnny Mercer. One was Tom Tugendhat, and the other I always forget his name. Who's sort of a even less important, but they all attacked him and threw him under the bus in a sort of disgusting way. It was just a leftist cancelling him, and they should have robustly defended Scruton, but they didn't. Now, Tom Tugendhat was the only one who I believe wrote a proper apology. Mercer never apologized. The other one did a half-baked apology thing,
Okay.
and Tugendhat did a proper apology, but he still did it. So I never quite forget that. On your other point, it seems to me the basic two approaches are you try to get the Labour vote by being a bit less mental than Labour, as you say, a bit less far left, and that's the sort of wet side, or you try and gather up all the Reform vote and you win by uniting the right. And those are the two basic choices you can do because they are going to get. I mean, even with this awful Starmer government, you are going to lose again unless Corbyn, which we'll talk about in a second, really splits the left. You are going to lose because the right remains split, and that's the big problem. You've got to bring it all back. And the question
Yeah.
is, will it be Farage that unites it? I did see a poll that suggested 63. Reform would win 63 seats now if there was an election. It was only one poll. What do you think on that, by the way? Is there,
Mhm.
as we sit now, is there a serious chance of Reform taking over from the Conservatives at the next election, or do the Tories just have to get it together and will they come through and be the opposition again?
I'm not sure in the last 100 years we've seen anything that would give us the impression that reform can do that. However, if Starmer keeps taking British politics in the direction he seems determined to do so, and there isn't a strong enough opposition from the right, then that is a huge vacuum to fill. And at the moment, the only person who can fill that vacuum with any integrity, I think, is Nigel Farage. And there's only so much, you can keep attacking Nigel from whatever angle you like, but the man is a skilled politician. who his longevity is unrivaled. You know, he when I talked earlier about blue tickets and red tickets and people understanding what these people stand for, at no point have you never understood what Nigel Farage stands for. You're either on board or you're not. But there's no sort of woolly underbelly here. It's just you are either on board with his politics or you are not. And he's a man of conviction, so he stands by it. Okay, and he argues it very well. And there's not everything that I agree with regards to the reform. I'd like to see Nigel Farage surrounded by as much integrity as possible. Now, I think one thing that's always mildly excited me, I had to admit, is that the idea that Nigel Farage may have become leader of the Conservative Party at some point. I just don't. I don't think it should happen, but I think it would be fascinating to watch and commentate on. I don't think there's anyone who's ever going to allow him back in at the moment. But make no mistake, whether I like it or you like it or anyone else likes it or not, they would coalesce around that. The right would coalesce around that, and you'd end up with a very strong right. But it feels to me a little bit like the Good Friday Agreement, something that's impossible but could happen. They are so vehemently against each other at the moment when they probably should vehemently agree. And I think that would be Nigel Farage's perspective, by the way. He would say that he's told the Tories how this should be done, and they've never done it. But I think right now, at this moment in time in 2024 in politics, Nigel Farage leads the right.
Yeah.
And in order for that to be really successful, they've got to coalesce around him. Either that or the Conservatives come up with a Conservative leader that is able to challenge Nigel Farage.
Yeah, they've definitely got to adopt him spiritually, if not actually. They've got to adopt his positions. But ideally they adopt him. As you say, it looks less likely now. There was a time when he was at the Conservative conference, dancing with Priti Patel, etc. It looked more likely. Now it does look very unlikely. They've all ruled it out. But they just haven't produced anyone comparable, anyone of that type of charisma. When they had Boris, they had a comparable figure in terms of public awareness and charisma. You look at these polls, no one's heard of any of these Conservative candidates. They've probably heard of Farage. Far more people have heard of him. The Conservatives do suddenly look quite irrelevant. It's quite disturbing how little, in general, the average person knows about politics when you follow it and you realize the average person knows absolutely nothing. They don't know who any of these people are. Maybe Priti Patel. But so in a way, the Conservatives are making themselves seem more and more irrelevant. And it's Farage who is the real opposition in the country, in everyone's mind. But the fact that can't happen in our system is the curveball, isn't it? But basically, Farage as leader of the Tories wins against Starmer in 2029. Definitely, in my book. But because that can't happen.
Reform has to become far more legitimate than it is now. It's still a grassroots political party. This accusation of it being a business, holds some weight because essentially it is, of which Nigel Farage is the CEO of.
Yeah.
But look at how successful that's been. But in order for it to grow as a real legitimate political concern within UK politics, it has to be more legitimate, more official. Sometimes I think the optics around reform don't look good. When you see those four guys stood in front of Westminster, they just look like Nigel Farage has got 4 or 5 bodyguards with him. It feels that way to me, except for Rupert Lowe, of course, who just, a public schoolboy who calls everyone by their surname, I'm sure. Don't know Rupert, but he was chairman of Southampton Football Club, so my view of him is tainted somewhat as a Portsmouth fan.
Well, most of them follow me on Twitter, so my view is based on that James does and Rupert, so they all seem all right to me. And of course, we both work with Farage. So, and Rich has been on this podcast. And Ben, my only problem is that Ben is so excluded from things. Ben Habib, because he's been on this podcast as well, and he's many people's favorite. And he said these things: they need to reform, and they need to be a properly democratic party. But I'm torn actually because on the one hand, yes, they need to be a serious party and function like a serious party. When he talks about being a democratic party and people being allowed to elect the leader, I think actually democracy doesn't work. So maybe a Farage, autocracy is what we actually need, both in the country and in reform.
It's a valid. I know, said tongue in cheek and with humour intended, but there is an element to that. That's exactly what Starmer's doing at the moment, by the way.
Yeah.
He's taken what looks like a massive majority voted for by a significant minority and is running with it. That's exactly what is working for them. And if you're on the side of Keir Starmer's politics right now, must look like heaven for you. It really must, because the world is their oyster. Unfortunately, it's going to be a really bad oyster, which is going to make everyone sick.
Yeah, I think he's falling
But
apart. I know you mean it should have been an open goal, but I think Starmer's going to, even though he says he plays football, I think he's going to sky the open goal and be so bad. I think they're going to. I could be wrong. People say that we can't see how to get rid of them. I think they might be forced to call an election early. But even if it goes for 5 years of hell, then surely he gets kicked out. But the problem is, yeah, the problem remains while the right is split that we don't get rid of Starmer, um, unless Paul. And here I seamlessly move to my next topic. Unless Jeremy Corbyn splits the Labour side with his new independent alliance, which is Corbyn with Shaukat Adam, Ayub Khan, Adnan Hussein, and Iqbal Mohammed. And these are all these people who won as independents, and he's putting them together as sort of like a sort of very dystopian version of Avengers Assemble. And it's this new alliance. One of their first actions, according to BBC, was to reach out to the 7 Labour MPs, all former allies of Mr. Corbyn, including his former Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell, who was suspended from the parliamentary party for 6 months after voting in favour of abolishing the cap. They're going to get all those guys if they can. But so far, there's been no formal collaboration between independent MPs and suspended Labour MPs, according to BBC. But they're attacking from the left. They're saying already this government has scrapped the winter fuel allowance for over 10 million pensioners. That's not even that much of a left point. It's almost like a general point. I guess it's a bit lefty because it's a handout. Voted to keep the 2-child benefits cap and ignored calls to end arms sales to Israel. Millions of people are crying out for a real alternative to austerity, inequality, and war, and their voices deserve to be heard. So it's a pro Palestine, anti Israel, pro winter fuel payments and benefits kind of coalition. And we know a lot of immigrants are on benefits. So this is kind of quite a big chunk of the country.
yeah, and I think a lot of those immigrants that are on benefits are elderly people as well. People who brought their families with them and have built communities based on their own families and their own culture. So there will be somewhere in that Venn diagram is a crossover between my views on the winter fuel allowance and their views on the winter fuel allowance, which is interesting to me. But what we've got here is, and I know it's been a trope that's been bandied around the last couple of days, but it's sectarian politics. The reason it's sectarian politics is because these seem to be the United Kingdom's alliance of Gaza. Of those people that were voted in to the UK, the Commons there, most of them were voted in on the back of a pro-Palestinian vote. And I don't think it's unfair to say that pro-Palestinian vote is de facto pro-Muslim vote, therefore is a religion and de facto sectarianism vote. Because what you end up with in the UK Parliament is as a section of them that are totally coalescing around one particular religion. Now, if you'd said Reform were the conservative Christian party of the UK, there would be an issue. There would be an issue because a significant loud voice on the left would tell you that there's no place for that in our politics. But of course, they'd be completely hypocritical because that's exactly what's going on with the pro-Palestinian vote, whether they like it or admit to it or not. Interestingly, to bring reform back up again, the fact that the very same people that will support this alliance would have been the people that said reform are a nothing and nobody and no entity. There's only 5 or 6 of them. Who cares? That's exactly what we've got with this alliance. And all of a sudden, they're saying how much wonderful stuff can be done with these people. I'm uncomfortable with it. I'm uncomfortable with it because not because of the racial element, not necessarily because of the religious element, but because once again it just bolsters this other perspective. It does nothing for the UK whatsoever. The reason they've chucked the winter fuel allowance thing in there is because they want to connect it in some way to UK politics. Because absolutely nothing they stand for connects them to UK politics whatsoever. Day to day running of this country and making this country successful, building this country's economy has to rely on building uh, the indigenous population. And I know indigenous is a strong word, and that doesn't need to mean people who look like me. It doesn't need to mean the Rashers, the People's Gammons followers. It doesn't need to mean that whatsoever. It can mean people that have been here for 50 years, 30 years, 20 years for all I care, different colours, whatever it might be, but have to uphold the values of being British, have to uphold the values of things that have made these great isles strong in the past. And we have to go back to it, whether we like it or not. It goes back to all the things I've said throughout this discussion, Nick. You have to have identity. And that is our identity. Completely muddying that waters with the identity of what's going on with Israel and Gaza, for me, is a nonsense and doesn't help us whatsoever.
It's madness, isn't it? I slightly resent because we do things like headliners, and certain people pick the stories who have a strong interest in Israel. We have to end up talking about it all the time, and I actually don't really want to talk about Israel Palestine. I don't know much about it. It's in a desert somewhere far, far away. It's like Star Wars. And I'm sorry, I'm just going to offend absolutely everyone as soon as I say this, but I just don't want to talk about it. I don't know much about it. I can't win. Josh will bite my head off if I pick one side, and other people will bite my head off if I pick the other. And I'm just like, I just want to talk about England, which is what I know about. It's like, do I have to talk about every blooming, like I'm against them both. There, how about that?
Well, and we're I don't differ with that really at all. It is a very difficult subject to make light. It's a very difficult subject to talk about. Where really the bulk of our education has come since October the 7th. But one thing it has been able to do is continually uphold what thing the side of the story that needs to be heard that the BBC, etc., don't. Outside of that, sometimes it's a very difficult subject to cover on headliners. Headliners, I think, as we all agree, and even Josh agrees, and Josh is obviously very partisan. He's a Zionist, he's a Jew, and he's very supportive of all those things, and all power to his elbow. But Josh would tell us all that this is about making a humorous program, a light-hearted view of the world, and we all have our things we like to talk about, but sometimes we have to temper that because the minute it strays into serious, why bother watching headliners? If it's a serious hour, then just watch Patrick Christie's because that's a great program. Just watch Grace at Reed Mogg or
Mm.
Farage or whoever. Uh, watch all those other programs because that's what they do very well. What Headliners does better than anyone else on the station is make it light, make it humorous, make it silly.
Yes.
And that's where we should. That's where our
And it's very
skills
hard to do
lie.
that about that, as you say. Here's something, probably the most controversial thing I'm going to say that I shouldn't even say, but whatever. It's my podcast, and I'll cancel myself if I want to. I've noticed someone replied to me the other day and said you should unsign the October Declaration, which I thought was an odd comment. I don't even know if that's even an option. I've forgotten about it, to be honest with you. But it did make me think one thing, that like when it comes to English people being attacked and called far right thugs and all this kind of thing, does any other group support them? Because rightly, I think when Jewish people are under attack and these horrible, intimidating street marches, from the river to the sea and all that stuff, and much worse things being said, and all kinds of clearly anti-Semitic stuff on the streets, which I agree it was anti-Semitic and awful, and obviously October 7th was horrific, as anyone could say who isn't completely nuts. Still, I go, I've certainly said all those things, and then you support Jewish people. Does anyone, not just Jewish people, does anyone support, whatever you want to call them, white British people, Christian people, whatever you want to call them, traditionally Christian people, whatever we are? What does anyone support that group ever that aren't in that
Politically,
group?
very few. And if they do, and they are of a different colour, they're slurred. They're called things like coconut.
True.
Um, and when you listen to these people, people of colour that are on the side of all the things that you just spoke about, they're usually coming from an angle of being very grateful and thankful for the life that they've been given in this country or the life their ancestors were given in this country. Because they came and it was difficult, but it was worth it. The one thing that separates them from what we're seeing now is there's an entire lack of assimilation, integration into our culture. So they don't have to come over here and try. They've got whole political bodies that tell them they don't have to come over here and try. They just got to be themselves and bring their culture with them, and we'll be enriched by it. Well, there's so much evidence to suggest that that isn't working and actually never has done. It only ever works when you bring flavors. It's like a meal, isn't it? The meal already exists, okay? And what legal immigration does is it might add a bit of flavour, but it adds a flavour to something that's already substantially existing. When you just put that ingredient in and that's all you can taste, it ruins what was there before. And whether that sounds too strong a language to use or not, is what's happening, and it's what was behind all the riots across the summer. And it's why I am still fairly angry with the thuggery and the far right element, because it's totally taken the wind out of the sails of that argument. It's very difficult to have that argument with someone who's not convinced without them being able to point out, oh, but what about far right thuggery, full force of the law, all the things that Yvette Cooper and Keir Starmer are leaning into. And it's because at the moment they've won the optics. And they've won the optics because there's no opposition. And they've won the optics because there was a very small element of bad people.
Mm. Yeah, and in my bubble, it feels like they haven't won the optics. But I'm aware that we're all in our own echo chamber to some degree. And when you look at the polls, they say they did like the handling of the riots, though Starmer's approval rating has plummeted. But that's for a whole host of reasons, including the winter fuel payment,
Yeah.
not for the riots. So it's depressing to me to think that anyone could think he handled the riots well, because I think he handled them so badly. But many people don't seem to be bothered about that. But then it proves my point once again. No one cares about this group. Certainly no one cares about white English working class people. But I will say, Paul, individuals have stood up for them. People like Calvin Robinson, people like Ben Habib, who has one white parent. He has very much stood up for people. But you never see a group, and perhaps it's a majority thing, but you never see a group stand up for. I never see. I think like people like Sikhs are quite supportive, but you don't actually see like Sikhs for the white, supporting working class British people or English people or whatever you'd call them, Anglo-Saxon. I don't know what phrase you could call them to make it clear, like we're supporting a different group, because obviously anyone can be British, but not anyone can be English, because that's an ethnicity. So I just love to see Hindus supporting standing up for the rights of, because let's face it, two-tier policing, as I've said elsewhere, is actually multiple tiers. Think of the poor young lady who was working for Nando's and was hit in the face with a plate by what seemed to be a Muslim gentleman. So she seemed to be black, but she was basically black British. Whereas if someone who's just like a Somalian or something who didn't seem British, who didn't speak the language and so on, who let's say was a migrant, they would take priority over her. Muslims would take priority over her. Controversial, but just clearly true. There are multiple tiers. Sikhs and Hindus are not as high as Muslims in our community's protected class, right? So there's many tiers. White working class people at the absolute bottom, but there are other people getting somewhat screwed. Could some of those groups say, well, we're standing with white working class people?
Yeah, it'd be really interesting. It would be really, if you can have queers for Hamas, then you definitely can have Sikhs for Anglo-Saxons, because that's definitely achievable. That's that is definitely something that could happen.
It sounds funny. You get it on an individual basis, and people, and some people, you get this at the Tommy Robinson marches and things, and some people criticize Tommy for it on the right. Because that's a critique of Tommy from the right. It's like, oh, you've watered it down too much to where it's just a sort of, it's just an anti-Islam movement. But you get all sorts of people, and he's friends with famously from Luton, he's friends with all kinds of people, and they all march for certain causes. And I think that is quite good when you see it on the march, but I've never seen it sort of formally represented like that. Sikhs for Anglo-Saxon. That's pretty funny. Controversial point, but it's pretty funny. Go on.
Maybe we should start leading it. I mean,
yeah, well, we're too deep in it, Paul. You're the people's gammon, so you can't be like gammon for gammon. We need other meats.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Support the gammons.
We know where I stand. It's interesting you mentioned that Nando's incident, because obviously that was harrowing. And what was fascinating about that, it was quite clearly an obviously Muslim family attacking a British person of colour. And she actually came out and did a sort of victim video. This is what happened. The police were in there, actually in the restaurant when it took place, and still did nothing about it.
They were laughing with the couple. The manager ignored her. The police ignored her because she was the wrong tier.
Let them go. Let them go. And she watched this on CCTV from the manager's office. And that story, with any other situation, is headline news for about a week. Because it's easy to blow that stuff up, really make it huge and keep the momentum. they just kept it under wraps. We did it on headliners twice, which was great. And I know it was covered by other presenters on GB News, but I don't remember seeing it anywhere else other than just a very quick snippet. And they just never allowed it enough oxygen. Because it came out, and the reason it came out that week was obvious as well, but because it came out in the week where extreme misogyny became a potential terrorist issue, um, there was just a very, very obvious flaw in that plan, because it is extreme misogyny if you're British, if you're white and British, but if you are anything else, particularly Muslim, it's not extreme misogyny; it's enrichment and cultural. So I just don't. I just think that at some point that's a house of cards that has to fall down.
Yeah, I agree. We're sick of two tier. All right. Well, speaking of Anglo Saxons, maybe I'll skip to some funny stories at the end. I don't have a name for this section yet. I've got to rename all my funny sections different names from the Weekly Skeptic, so that could be challenging. But here's a ridiculous story. University cancels Anglo Saxon to decolonize the curriculum, and this comes from the University of Nottingham, and it was completely ridiculous. They were offering courses in Anglo Saxon history and literature, and it offers a Viking studies course. It's the only university to do so, apparently. But in a move to decolonize the curriculum, professors have renamed the master's course in Viking and Anglo-Saxon studies as Viking and Early Medieval English Studies. So you're still allowed to be Viking, weirdly. I don't know why. I mean, they came over and raped and pillaged, and you're allowed to be them, but you're not allowed to be the poor old Anglo-Saxons. I mean, what is wrong with the Anglo-Saxons? I mean, they're sort of Germanic. I mean, why? It's because, of
It's
course, it says it follows a similar move in the United States, this is in the Telegraph, where academics in particular have campaigned against the term Anglo Saxon because it suggests a distinct native Englishness. Oh no, we better not ever suggest a distinct native Englishness, Paul. Then they might think they exist as a people, whereas, of course, we have to erase English people from history because we're good people who like to just erase all memory and existence of an entire people.
uh, I mean, just saying Anglo-Saxon was a fairly interesting subject at school, but since that time, since those glory days of school, it's become this kind of trope for far right Nazism or something. If you utter the words Anglo-Saxon, you're basically, it's a dog whistle to say, we're white supremacists. And somehow this has been able to stick. I mean, it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life, but it's been able to stick in some way. So it makes it an easy thing to attack. I mean, they talk about decolonizing education, but it's like anti-racism. They always use racism to be anti-race. So they just to be anti-racism. So what they do is they say, no, you can't be racist against these people, but you can be racist against these people. Or you need to decolonize education from these people, but it's okay. We're going to colonize it with the trans debate, the trans agenda, whatever it is. They just recolonize in another way. No one comes up. No, they find a way to attack it, and then they do exactly. It's Animal Farm again. It's communism. It's the pigs taking over, and now they're all in the beds in the house, and four legs are good and two legs are bad. There's no solution. It's the same thing regurgitated in their image. Nothing's changed. It's just all we've done is we said, "Oh no, this isn't good anymore, but this is."
Yeah,
It's a madness. It's absolutely ridiculous.
it is funny how you say that a sort of fairly dry academic term has come to mean a kind of dog whistle. Although you've ruined it by making it explicit, Paul. We stop ruining our dog whistles. Um,
Yeah,
what about another silly story? BWC NHS Trust, which is the Birmingham Women's and Children's NHS Foundation. And you think, well, whatever. But they put out this absurd tweet. You may have noticed that we didn't change our social media logos after Pride Month ended in June. Why? Well, it wasn't a mistake. It's because we take pride in supporting everyone, including our LGBTQ plus patients, families, and colleagues every day. So I think this is good because we need to know who the dangerous idiots are all year round. And I also like this extra thing they put. And we recently achieved Stonewall Gold status, this top standard for having a positive LGBTQ plus culture in an organization. Happy Pride this month and every month. It's like, oh, so you achieve the top level in a scam from a totally discredited organization where you pay to get given awards, and then you say, "Oh, we've won this award that we paid for from the scam organization." I mean, how are people still doing this stuff in September 2024, Paul?
because big business, big organisations are so indoctrinated now. They've taken the pill. It's a bit late. You can't turn that ship round. I mean, I've no problem whatsoever in people being allies or supportive of whatever they want to, LGBTQ plus, whatever. But can we not now at this point, particularly in 2024, just assume that? It doesn't need a flag. I assume they also don't want to sexually harm children in their hospital, or invite men into women's spaces, into a women's hospital. But they do, and they are, but they don't have a flag for that. So it feels ridiculous to me. It feels like something you haven't got to say. Why is someone's sexuality so important? I've never got my head around this. I mean, the idea of it existing, fine, and the idea of them being able to exist in peace and love and harmony, fine, no problem whatsoever. But you don't need to tell me that's what you believe. I just assume you do anyway. Because have we all got to go around saying the things that we strongly believe in and the things that we stand up against? Oh, if I walked into a kid's play area and went, I'm really against paedophilia, straight away I'm in big trouble.
An unorthodox move, but you are a maverick.
Exactly. If you walk into a women and children's hospital and say you're all for women and all for children,
you're like, I kind of assume that, yeah, that is weird. It is very, very strange. I just think it's this thing. You think woke is being put away, at least some of the more egregious edges of it, but you go, oh, they're still doing it. But it's just so everyone just hates it. They turn off replies, huh?
The Stonewall thing is, I know you mentioned it. We shouldn't let it go, just left there, because that's such such an important thing. The fact they've got a Stonewall Gold Award tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah,
they should have that on their Twitter page, because that straight away that's a red flag.
Yes,
we should know that. Who cares? Why have you got that? Why does that matter? What is your primary objective in your service? What service are you providing? The primary objective is to do it, to provide that health service to the best of your ability. It's got nothing to do with anything else.
Yeah.
And the fact that you've invested lots and lots of money, which you would have had to have done to achieve a Stonewall Gold Award, is a bit of a red flag.
Yeah, it's basically a dickhead certificate. You've got an actual certificate there saying we are dangerous idiots. All right, well, that was some fun stories at the end. And because, Paul, I feel like we've done so long, we should stop. I've taken up too much of your time. I didn't mean to do it, but this is like...
I didn't realise it. I've just seen how long it's been. It's been a wonderful time, Nick. I love this.
Great fun. And I wanted to give people some value on this new podcast, which is not that new and sort of new, the topical version of the current thing. It's a bit complicated the way I've done that, but it's actually very simple. I've just kept on going and kept the same name, in actual fact, but doing it as a topical show, and hopefully people will like it. It's a bit different from, they've left the Weekly Skeptic. Some of them will just be current thing fans who were never Weekly Skeptic fans, but some have left the Weekly Skeptic. It's like getting a new girlfriend, Paul. It's like you've got to weigh it up. Like, okay, she's not quite as hot, but she's also not a narcissistic psychopath, or the opposite. She's hotter, but she is a narcissistic psychopath. It's just swings and roundabouts, Paul. And the new podcast, it's the Morrissey solo album. Okay, we all love the Smiths, but we also love Your Arsenal, or Vauxhall and I, or Viva Hate. These are all good. I mean, some of Morrissey's greatest songs are solo. Every Day is Like Sunday. That's a solo song. So let's all just chill out. That it's not all this charming man. Do you see my point, Paul? It's a musical analogy.
I mean, I wasn't expecting to use a Smiths Morrissey analogy, but
yeah,
it works.
The only difference is I think I'm better than just the Weekly Skeptic. I think just me on my own is actually stronger. But I can't think of an example where that's ever been the case in pop history. I mean, Toby tried to say it would be like Noel's solo ventures or Liam's solo ventures. Yeah, they have not worked. But if you're Morrissey like me and you're the creative genius yourself, it should in theory work.
Did Paul Weller work better than the Jam? No, I don't think so.
No, he was okay though, wasn't he? He was solid, yeah.
He was.
Who has been
Stanley Road? That album, Stanley Road, was
for me, and people will hate this. Peter Gabriel, I actually prefer to Genesis, but I know that's controversial.
Yes, but then again, did he have a better career than Phil Collins?
Well, then I can be Phil Collins as well, though, can't I? I can be Phil Collins over Genesis.
So I loved how we both took a moment to really ponder that then. Of all the things we've spoken to today, you and I stopped to think most about whether Peter Gabriel and Phil Collins, who who had the better solo.
But I could be either
Don't
of
know
those
what
examples. They both work for me going solo. I'll be Phil Collins. I mean, yeah,
Exactly.
great. Yeah, Phil Collins, much more commercially successful. And Peter Gabriel, Genesis didn't have Sledgehammer. Now, for the artsy fartsy people, Genesis were better, but they didn't have Sledgehammer. They didn't have Don't Give Up. In this proud land we
Yeah.
grew up strong. Sorry. Um, so anyway, no one's listening at this point. We've been going for like 3 hours. But we hope, good. We found 2 examples there of someone who had a more successful solo career. So there we go. So that's the podcast. You can follow me. Well, actually, let's find out, where can we follow you first, Paul?
Yeah, at Paul Cox Comedy on everywhere. That's what I'd like you to do. Just follow me on Twitter. That'll do me just dandy. Thank you very much for everyone who does so far.
Okay, we should have put it at the start, because who's going to listen to 1 hour 40? Well, the hardcore fans is the answer, who will then follow you
Yeah,
if they don't already.
welcome to all four.
And of course, go to nickdixon.net for all my extra content. I'm going to do this show for free because I'm a nice guy, I'm a great guy. But I'm going to do my reaction episodes behind the paywall, my articles behind the paywall, the full guest episodes behind the paywall. And we already have loads with people like Lord Frost, Carl Benjamin, a whole load of people. Steve Edgerton was a great one, Ben Habib. We've got the full versions on nickdixon.net, where it's £5 a month to sign up, which, in inflation Britain, what is that? The price of a Snickers bar now? I don't know. What do you get for £5, Paul?
Oh, I hope a Snickers bar is. I hope you get a pack of. Oh, actually, it's a good point. I have no idea. We sound like one of those politicians. I actually don't know what a pint of milk costs either.
No, but for a whole month, you've got to divide it by the month. So I think £5 a month. And
£5 is very cheap.
it's very
you
cheap.
Can pay £5 for this episode.
Exactly. And you can support me, and you can support my one-man, as Paul says, media outlet, one-man crusade to try and save the West. And I'm still going to be paying people to produce stuff, especially for the studio episodes. So, you help us support them as well. And so I can pay everyone. I'm just trying to survive in this cruel world. And when GB goes tits up, it really will be just this. So your support is massively appreciated. NickDixon.net. Follow Paul as well. We'll see you again next week. I already have a new guest who you haven't seen before, who I think you'll like, for the topical current thing. And we'll be doing it every week. So, but anyway, let's just get out of here and say thank you very much, Paul, once again.